Okay, this is a very, very cute solo. Oh, sorry, I haven't been around, by the way. I've been too busy living my life and playing guitar. And I have promised that I won't ever put anything on YouTube unless it was something worth sharing. Frequently, I've been publishing some YouTube shorts of me rocking out in my apartment in Dublin to various Queen tunes. And very often I get some responses looking for tabs and sometimes looking for lessons. I have zero interest in sitting down and writing out scores. There's plenty of scores that do circulate around the internet. But the guitar is a very interesting instrument because there's a lot of stuff that's subject to interpretation, and particularly with Brian May's stuff. Now, very often if you're playing, you know, thrash metal or heavier music, it relies a lot on open strings. And if you get a tab for something like that, it's probably broadly going to be okay. But when you're playing solos, there's factors that can make a big difference to how the song sounds. Excuse me. And this is a good example of that. This is a very, very, very deep cut of Brian May's. It's from this album, Another World. And if you'll indulge my granddad moment for a minute, I was a teenager when this thing came out. And, you know, if you were into Queen and Brian May at that stage, there was this big gap after Innuendo, and then Freddie had died. And there was a lot of people getting into Queen, and, you know, there wasn't a lot of stuff to get because Freddie had died, obviously. And the first thing that happened is Brian May had his solo album, Back to the Light. Then there was Made in Heaven, and those were all very exciting landmarks. But between about 1992 and onwards, there was a real big lull. And this came out in 1998, and this kind of sort of bridged the gap. So it landed more heavily than it might nowadays in the social media space. And it wasn't as big a hit as Back to the Light because it didn't quite have the same sort of the big rush for Queen stuff there. But also, it's a very introspective album. There's a lot of songs where Brian is reflecting on his own life. There's also the fact that he tried to write it as a cover album, and there is 2 covers on it, One Rainy Wish and Slow Down. There could have been or 3 actually, sorry, all the way from emphasis on it. But the songs that he wrote himself are actually quite introspective. One was written for a computer game, and it's a very diverse album, much like a lot of Queen albums. This song is a cute little ballad, and it caught my ear for a lesson because, first of all, someone asked me to make the lesson video, but also because it deals with this idea of why tabs can be misleading. Now, there was a tab book produced of this album, and it's okay. Like, it's actually quite good because there's some very difficult parts in that album, and this is before we had AI for slowing down digital recording and splitting out multi-track, so the transcriber did a very good job, all things considered. However, now we now live in a time where everybody can load up Logic on their Mac and split something into its stems and hear these things a little bit more clearly. So my point is that tabs may be literally correct in terms of identifying the pitches, but where the notes are played can actually have a big difference on the sound. And this is a good example of that. This is a good solo for anybody to learn. And I mean anybody, because when I go off to do a Queen gig with the tribute band, the first thing that I'll actually practice backstage and at home is the string bending, because that's the most dangerous part of Brian's stuff. It's not the picking, it's not the legato work, it's the bends, because some of them, they're not in keys that are sort of natural sort of home bases for guitars, like Bohemian Rhapsody, like the solo, I think it's an E flat, and those sort of piano type keys, your ear can be led astray by bad habits. And this is great because the string bending in it is a masterclass. It's a very simple solo melodically, but the bending in it is a little bit tricky, so everybody should have a go at it just because it does keep you on your toes that way. But the other thing about it that's kind of interesting is that when I broke it apart, I obviously completely different from the transcription on one particular point, and I'll just show you what it is and then we'll just get into it and I'll show you how to play it. First of all, I usually recommend that you understand what's going on chordally with a song so you can understand where the solo is coming from, so you're getting more out of it. But there's actually not a lot happening here chordally. There's only 2 chords under the solo. Good old D fifth, doesn't really have major minor tonality, and G minor. What I will say is modally this is a very interesting piece, and I'll talk about that at the end. But first I'll just show you where the tabs sometimes go wrong. So over a D chord, the tab book, the official one, and many transcriptions will say play this note and slide it up to here. And that sounds broadly correct, but when you listen to it in isolation, it seems a lot brighter. So my gut is that he actually plays it from here, because there's a little bit more higher content in choosing that there. And that's the great thing about the guitar, is that you can play the same phrase, like here, here, here. Could I play it here? Yeah, go on. Sorry, I was out of my range there, pardon the pun. But they all sound very different because of the windings of the strings and the voicing on the location of the neck, all of that stuff. It'll all make it sound quite different. So it's worth paying attention to things like that. But the other reason why it's important too is that what you need to do in the rest of the solo might require you adapting where you play something too, because the second part of the solo is a drop in. I can hear it on the tape. And that's fine. We all do that in the studio just to get the job done. But I find that if I was to play the second part, and just show you what it looks like, it's a high D going to a high A. You'd want to be kind of near there to be able to pull that off convincingly. And if you're playing it up here and jumping back here, I found it a bit of an unnatural move. Anyway, here's how you play the thing. So first things first, over a D chord, we're going to play the D note, the third fret of the B, and slide it up to its fifth, which is the 10th fret. And it's a very quick slide. So in other words, the distance traveled, you don't hear a lot of the finger running over the frets. Now, the chord changes to G minor. And just to show you G minor, so that's G minor here. And then when we bring it up the neck, it looks like this. So it has this note in it, this B flat. So that's the next note. Okay, now here's the first hard part. So this is a pre-bend. So in my video about string bending by Brian, this is one of his sort of classic moves where he makes the guitar sound a lot like a violin or clarinet or an instrument that doesn't have frets by using pre-bent notes and bringing them and resolving them to fretted notes. So in other words, this note is bent up, this B flat is bent up to sound like a C. So the practice is to be able to find where that is before you hear it and let it come down. So in the song it goes, so slide, and then you re-pick it when it comes down. Now here's the next hard part. So it sounds like when you play it that he goes, but what he actually does, instead of playing that B flat twice and that A twice, is he bends into the second iteration of each note. So in other words, when you do the pre-bend and let it down, you hit the note again, and then you bend this one up to sound like it, and let it down to A, and then hit the note behind the A and bend it up to A. So I'm going to do that really slowly because it probably sounds like, but anyway. And that gives it a real violin type of feel to it because the notes are just have different articulations and makes them really vocal-like, because that's what a singer kind of does. Okay, next bit. So now we're going to go for the 10th fret of the E string, which is a D note, and we do a similar motif. Scrape that one, and then watch this. So we go from 10 up to fret 22, and here's our next hard bend. So what he does here, he's bending this D note up to an F. Now that is off the neck, so you kind of have to hear it, and then back up to E. So that's like bending it up 3 frets and 2 frets. just plays 20 and 22, and I wouldn't be precious as to which of these two fingers you use to get to 22nd fret. So let's look at that section again in total. And you just hang on to that note for a while. Now, finally. So this is a little D5 arpeggio, and it ends, just explain D5 I suppose. So there's your good old-fashioned D chord. Here it is up an octave. That's it with an extra fifth in there, and that's what you're playing. But to phrase it correctly, we play this note, the 14th on the G, 15th on the B, and then we grab actually 16, the G sharp, on the E string, and do two little semitone bends and a vibrato to bring it up to that A. And this again makes it phrase a little bit more like a singer would. So I'm going to go through the whole lot again just to make sure that it all makes sense, because you're not here in front of me. I don't know how much of it you've got, and I'm not very good at teaching people that aren't here because you don't get that feedback loop. So I'll go through it again and try and give me some feedback so I can get better at this. But in any case, so from the top, this D note on the B string, up to this A, 10th fret in the B, and again to the 11th fret, which is a B flat. Pre-bend up a tone on that. Re-strike it when you let it down. Back a fret. Let it down, rip the hit, and then the fret behind it. So that bit again. And then 10th fret on the E, up to 17, so same thing as before, but up an octave. And then this time up to fret 22, and then a tone and a half of a bend up to F, and then a tone bend up to E, and then 20 to 22, or if you like, C to D. So that's it. There's not a huge exploration here. Just learn it, give it a go. It'll do your bending wonders, and even though this video is about 20 times longer than it will take you to learn it, it is actually quick enough to do. Just a couple of notes on the sound. This is using Brian May's famous Deacy amp. If I was a clever content creator, I'd have brought out my amp to show you. But I'm actually not using that amp because it's not very apartment friendly, it's quite loud. So this is one of my experiments in capturing it in ToneX. I'm deep in a new ToneX project at the moment, which we're going to look at more amps, including the Deacy. And it got put back because IK Multimedia dropped the second version of the ToneX algorithm, and it doesn't make as much difference as some people think it will make, but for some things it might make a huge difference. But the thing that's really interesting about this new project is it is going to have a pronounced Deacy focus, plus some extraordinarily useful Vox amps that are the same ones that Brian May has used in the studio throughout the years. So we'll talk about that more again, and if you're interested in getting those sounds, just check out the links below, and you can run those on the ToneX pedal, the new ToneX practice tool, and the apps. So yeah, please support me on that, because it's going to be an expensive day in the studio in a couple of weeks' time, so all donations welcome. So that's that particular tune. Let me know how you get on, and hopefully I'll see you soon.